item is approval of the consent agenda.
Okay. First of all, we have to let everybody know that this is required by the city of Roanoke under emergency conditions. I'm not going to read everything that's supposed to be on there, but this is the reason we're having the Zoom meetings. I'd like to welcome everyone. First thing I want to do is with roll call. Mr. Secretary, could you?
Yes, sir. Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Clinton?
Here.
Mr. Martin?
Here, sir.
Mr. Jeffrey?
Here.
Ms. Moon Reynolds? Ms. Moon Reynolds? I know Mr. Fidgelowski will not be at the meeting. He emailed us earlier. Mr. North?
Here.
Mr. Radford? Mr. Radford? Mayor Turk?
Here.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Lyles?
Here.
Mr. Stovall? Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mr. Powers from the Airport Commission couldn't be with us today as well. Mr. Sonneckler?
Here, sorry, I was on mute.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
All right, sir. Okay.
Mr. Chair, to Wayne, Ms. Moon Reynolds joined after you called her name.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and I believe the first thing on the agenda was the consent agenda.
Approve the consent agenda and the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I assume everyone's had an opportunity to review that. Do I hear a motion to accept or approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion, Mr. Chair, we approve the consent agenda under item 2A and B.
All right, sir.
I'll second that, Mickey Johnson.
Okay, any question on that? No questions, okay. All in favor, say aye.
I'm meant to call the roll, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay,
No, it's okay. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Clinton?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
here.
Mr. Jeffrey?
Yes.
Ms. Moon Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. North?
Yes,
I don't think Mr. Radford has come in as yet. So. Mayor Turk?
Here.
Mr.
Sorry.
Lyles? Sorry, Mr. Lyles?
Yes.
I don't think Mr. Stovall's come in as yet either. Okay. Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Sonneckler?
Yes.
Motion is approved, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, sir. I have no remarks for this meeting, so we'll just bypass that and we'll go to agenda item number 4, which is continued development of draft FY22 through 27-28 surface transportation block grant. And Miss Christina Finch will make that presentation for us. So Miss Finch, if you would like to take the floor, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you and to all of the members of the policy board. I will share my screen so I can do the PowerPoint presentation. All right, can everyone see that okay? Yes, okay, wonderful. Well, we had initially started talking about the update to the Surface Transportation Block Grant financial plan back in January. And I wanted to continue that discussion today and hopefully get some guidance from you on where you would like to see project funding increases occur, if that's the will of the board. So let me give you a few updates here. Unfortunately, funding is down by several $1 million over the 6-year period, FY22 through 27. And of course, we're all aware of the effect that the pandemic has had on people's travel, which affects revenue, which now we're seeing trickle through with the financial forecasts that were updated and provided to us by VDOT central office. And this is a number that is adjusted every year. Some years it's gone up, some years it has gone down. And so this year we're seeing a big down, but it is hopeful that number will reverse itself in future years so that we can see more funding requests and maybe better schedules in the future. But we are in a little bit of a tight spot this year, so I'll go through some of the details there. So for the 6-year period, the total funding available is just a little over $28 million. And with the board's policy changes last month that were acted on, you can also now consider a year 7 funding, so FY28, which is not a year that is reflected in this Commonwealth Transportation Board's 6-year improvement program. So that is something that would just be unique to the RVTPO, and we would keep that information as we move into the next year cycle if you choose to allocate any funds for FY28. But for now, that amount is assumed to be the same as what we know is available for FY27. So just to summarize, there were 7 out of 9 projects that had been submitted for Smart Scale Round 4 that were successful in the draft funding scenario. So those projects had conditionally committed funding on them before. And so that money, $7.9 million, is now recommended for commitment by the TTC so that those projects can move forward with the Smart Scale money that will be applied to them. There are 2 projects that are returning funding in the amount of $3.5 million. And then there are a number of additional funding requests. There were 7 projects that are asking for almost $7 million. These are current projects that the TPO has funded. Many of these projects have a mix of funding sources on them. STBG happens to be the most accessible pot of money and the one that doesn't require any local match, same as Smart Scale. So it's an easy first go to request the money through this source. And then we had one project that was asking for a continuation of the conditionally committed funding that it had received. It was one of the 2 projects that was not successful in Smart Scale Round 4. And so looking to have some conditional money in the next round of Smart Scale. So let me dive a little bit deeper into each of these items. Okay, so these are the 4 projects that had gone through the application cycle last year that had conditionally committed funding applied to them. The one on top is the one that unfortunately was not successful in this round. It's the Route 220 Super Street and Access Management Project in Botetourt County. And they had a mix of committed money and conditionally committed money. And so the $924,000 you see there on top is what had been committed, and that would go towards preliminary engineering of the project. The $2,076,000 was conditionally committed, conditional upon its success in securing other funding. Now that other funding is not specified that it must be Smart Scale, though that was the intent that it get Smart Scale. And so they're requesting to have that amount of money or some amount of money allocated so that it can apply for Smart Scale Round 5 funding. And then the next 3, the Route 419 Streetscape Project, the Aviation Drive Project, and Valley Point Parkway, also all had a hybrid of committed and conditionally committed funding. They have all been included in the draft Smart Scale Round 4 funding scenario. And so what's in red would become committed, and then that plus the committed amount would become the new total contribution from STBG. But you can see in the total project cost, these are pricey projects. And so STBG is only a portion of what those projects are costing. So you can see what that total is. Okay, then if you'll recall, back in June, there were 5 projects that had come in as out of cycle requests. They were the result of the Route 460 operational improvement study. And so this information wasn't known during the application cycle, which is why they came in as an out of cycle request. And they were seeking STBG money as leverage for Smart Scale. 4 out of the 5 were successful in the draft funding scenario. And the last one there, the Route 460 and Route 220 intersection improvements, is returning the $2.5 million that it had been conditionally granted. And then the other 4, those funds in red would become committed funds. And that's the recommendation of the TTC that occur.
Any,
Okay.
any questions, comments from the members?
And I can take comments throughout the presentation. There are a series of slides still to come. So this is the Smart Scale piece, so I can take any questions on that piece, but then I'll also go into the other projects that are requesting money and returning money as well. Okay, I'll continue the presentation then at this time, Mr. Martin.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the projects, there are 2 that are returning STBG funding. The first one here is the Roanoke River Greenway from the city of Salem to Bridge Street. And this kind of shows the history of the funding. It was one of the original projects back in 2013. It had gotten $2.8 million, then had come in for a request of $1.5 million more in 2016, which it was granted. Unfortunately, when the agreement with VDOT was made, it did not include that full amount. And so the city had found other funds to pursue the project. And so that project is being finished now with non-federal sources of funding. So it's not going to need this $750,000 in order to keep the project on schedule. So the city is returning $750,000. And so that 3.6 billion is what the new amount would be for this project. The next one here that's returning money is the Roanoke River Greenway, a water pollution control plant to the Blue Ridge Parkway. It was included in the bundle of Roanoke River Greenway projects back in 2013. It had been given $5.8 million. And actually just last year, that money was reduced by 1.6 million down to 4.2. A number of issues related to right-of-way have continued to occur on the project. And so they are reducing the project scope and they're returning $2.7 million. So the total funding recommended here is 1.5. And I can show you a map on this next slide that shows the piece that will be constructed. So the water pollution control plant is at the top left of the screen. The 2 black circles show the pieces that will be constructed with the $1.5 million. And then the portion in red in the middle is the part that is going to be removed from this project scope due to those right-of-way issues. Okay, and then we have a number of additional funding requests. There are 7 listed here. The first one is the Roanoke River Greenway from Green Hill Park to Riverside Park, so on the west side of town. Originally in 2013, they had been granted $2.9 million. Then they had come in for a request last year, which was granted for additional funding, and that total became $4.5 million. There are a number of project cost increases that have occurred since then, and so the county is now requesting an additional $3 million, which would bring that project up to $7.6 million to cover those cost overruns. The next one here is Tinker Creek Trail Extension. And if you're following along with the agenda packet, that's what those numbers are on the left side, is the corresponding number from your agenda packet. So the Tinker Creek Trail Extension, they have come in for a request for 1.5 million additional in funding. This is one that came in after the TTC met, so it did not get a recommendation from the TTC. So the total request here is $4.8 million. So 1.5 added to what they already have as 3.2. The next project is the Walnut Avenue Bicycle and Pedestrian Accommodations. And that amount has also been updated since the TTC met. That project is now needing an additional $336,000 $110 for a total of $881,360. So those two that are in blue there were not reviewed by the TTC. The TTC didn't have that information when they made their recommendation. All of these other ones that are not in blue on the left side were recommended at their requested amount. Okay, the next one there, number 8, is an increase for the Orange Market Park and Ride parking lot improvements. They're asking for an additional $892,000. The next one, the Roanoke River Greenway East project had originally gotten money, $835,000 to do a study and conduct some preliminary engineering. Given that the city was returning the $750,000 for the other section of the Greenway, they were requesting $750,000 here to support construction, though that construction amount is not known at this time. Then the next one, the Gus Nix Boulevard pedestrian bicycle crossing is asking for $234,000 to add to its original $169,000 for a total of $403,000. And then the last one on this slide is the Oak Grove Streetscape Improvements Crosswalk Project. Original estimate was $136,000 and they're asking for an additional $82,000, which would bring it up to $218,000. So in total, these 7 projects are asking for almost $7 million above what they were already granted. So some things to consider. All of these projects were scored, unless they were an out-of-cycle request. They were all scored based off of a number of criteria by the TTC members. They were considered in terms of their scope, what would be accomplished with the funding that was being requested. And that's how the recommendation and then ultimately the TPO's original approval of these projects came to be. Certainly the projects have a certain level of significance to the region's transportation system. And there may be some other opportunities for funding options. I had included that in the agenda packet. It's referenced in the STBG procedures that whenever cost overruns occur, that there are a number of avenues to consider on how to handle that cost overrun. Some projects in the past have pursued smart scale funding. As we see on one of the Roanoke River Greenway projects, they are reducing their project scope. So there are a number of ways to address funding concerns. Certainly future smart scale options, transportation alternatives funding. There's a new application cycle coming up in the fall, which would have some funding available in the next couple of years. And then of course, there's always local funds, though I know that that's a last resort. So whenever VDOT enters into project agreements with localities and as they provide cost estimates, it's with the understanding that the localities are ultimately accepting that cost estimate and the financial risk that comes with it when pursuing a project. So that's something to keep in mind as you consider these requests. Certainly, all of those requests have different project schedules or construction readiness. Some of the requests are to leverage funding for future smart scale applications, and some of them are ready for construction in the next year or two. And then there are a number of current project and smart scale commitments already made. So considering what else could be done in addition to those is something to think about. So basically, I've run some numbers and the estimated STBG funding summary is shown here. So we have to look back to the total program. So how much money has been available since the project was originally initiated, especially since we're looking at projects that were funded in that very first round and funding shifts taking place with them. So for the whole program, if we include this new year 7, which is FY28, the total available amount is a little over $73 million. And the total committed amount is a little over $67 million. And that includes the smart scale commitments and the current projects. So I've assumed that all the smart scale conditionally committed funds would be committed. And so what's remaining is a little over $6 million. And the other requests, the 7 additional funding requests, plus the 1 conditional request from Botetourt, come out to a little over $9 million. So there is a shortfall of almost $3 million to be able to accommodate everyone's requests. It simply can't be done with the current financial forecasts. So today's actions are for you to consider the preferred projects and to identify what projects you would like to give money to and in what amount, and then direct us to go ahead and schedule the public hearing for the next meeting on any proposed funding increases for these projects. The STBG procedures state that before the board approves any funding increases for STBG projects, it must go through the public hearing. And so we're trying to get information in line with the CTB 6-year improvement program. So following today's meeting, we'll actually be drafting that 6-year financial plan and getting that to VDOT and having the TTC review it so that they can see how it shakes out in terms of project schedules and when certain projects would be receiving money. And then that would come to the board in April for review and approval. And then that would get rolled into the final 6-year improvement program. So that is the presentation that I have for you today, and I would be happy to answer any questions as you think about the priorities.
Anyone have any comments or questions for Christina?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Bill North here. Question on page 10 of the packet. Remove item 13 on page 10, talking about removing 2.5 million of conditionally committed funding on the 460 and alternate 220 intersection improvements, which was not scored high enough, I think, in the smart scale application. Mr. King, you can speak to that to confirm it. But my question is, did the TDCC recommend that this money that was earmarked in the future year for smart scale be used to fund these other projects? And is it possible that if Botetourt concurs, because this was a joint venture with Botetourt as well as the city on the 460 corridor, should we hold those funds until the next round of smart scale? That's the question. And also the second question for Mr. King is, what's your opinion on this as well, if you have one?
Okay, Mr. North, I can speak to that first. The TTC did recommend acceptance of the $2.5 million back into the STBG pot. So we had received notice that Roanoke County's desire was to return the money, as the understanding was that if they didn't secure the funding through smart scale, that the money would be returned, and not able to find money immediately to make up that difference. Now, in terms of holding that money to a future round of smart scale, that request has not been made.
Mr. Chair, I can address Mr. North's question.
Yes, sir.
So Mr. North, it did score below and not to a level to be able to get, to get in this round. Certainly it's key intersection of key corridors, that connect through Roanoke, Botetourt, and eventually to Bedford and Lynchburg. It is, I think, a very strategic and good project to support, but certainly there are financial needs on many projects. So that would be my, I would continue to advocate that we look to find ways to find funding for that intersection improvement. But to the degree that money continue to be earmarked for that, I think would be a question for the larger board. I do have one comment as it relates to the projects that are in need of the additional funding. I think it would be helpful, and because I'm just a little bit unclear myself, as to whether all of the funding that's being added is due to unforeseen cost increases that could be because of the projects being pushed to the outer years and inflation being a factor of that, or whether there's actually a change in scope. That might be good, especially if we go out to public comment on things of that nature, to make that a little bit more explicit in terms of, if is there a change in the scope that's causing a need for the additional money, or is it simply cost increases that are due to inflation or unforeseen factors?
Mr. King, if you'd like, we could run through those additional requests. And I do believe we have project sponsors here available to speak to those additional fund requests if you'd like.
Well, I got to apologize in two ways. One, I raise a question and then leave in a matter of 3 minutes here to get to another commitment. So I really was just making the point that I think it would be good, especially as we go to public comment, for the public to understand if that's a change in scope or change in increased cost, just to clarify that as a part of the information that's there. So unfortunately, I am going to have to hand off the VDOT representation to Mr. Gray and go to another commitment I have with a prior commitment with the commissioner. So I apologize for my departure to the board. And I'll yield the floor back to the chair, Mr. Martin.
All right, so would you have any more comments or questions for Ms. Finch? Okay, I suppose we need to vote on this to approve this. Is this right?
Mr. Martin, what I need is actually direction from the board. We can't accommodate all of the requests within the financial plan, even going to FY28. There's a shortfall of almost $3 million here. And so looking at the 7 additional funding requests plus the 1 conditional request from Valley-Alleghany County, I need some direction from the board on the board's priorities for funding any of these requests. And I'll go back to this screen here that shows the 7 additional funding requests, and then Valley-Alleghany County had requested $2,076,000 for leverage money for the next round of Smart Scale to help bring the Route 220 Super Steep project total cost request down in that Smart Scale application. So it's these 7 plus that 1 that I'm looking for the board's direction on what are the priorities for funding. And certainly, each of these ones on the screen have different schedules. A number of them, though, are looking to go to construction in the next couple years, and so would need the funds in the next couple years. So the first 2 are, let's see, the first 4 are in that boat. So Roanoke River Greenway, Green Hill Park, Tinker Creek, Walnut Avenue, and Orange Market are looking to go to construction and are wanting to have the cost overruns covered by STBG. The next one, number 9, the Roanoke River Greenway East, that one just has PE money on it right now, and its request of $750,000 would go towards construction, but not until FY28. And then the next 2, Gus Nix and Oak Grove, are looking to go to construction soon. So I think the challenge here is that we have 6 out of these 7 projects that are looking for construction money in the next few years, and there isn't enough money to cover that in the next few years.
Was Valley-Alleghany County supposed to be on here?
Well, it wasn't an additional funding request. It was a continuation of the conditional funding request. So that is another project, which is the Route 220 project, asking for $2 million.
Okay, so we're short almost $3 million.
Correct.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
a question from Ms. Finch. Your spreadsheet is a good spreadsheet, but I don't see a column for construction timeline on each one of these projects. With that said, at a glance, if there was a column there, it would be easy to determine which projects could be accomplished soonest and which projects might not be, therefore putting a priority on the construction timeline of those that can happen sooner than later would help guide the priority for funding. That's just an observation.
I can address that question, Mr. North. All of the projects on this list, except for the Roanoke River Greenway East projects in number 9, which is towards the middle bottom of the list, which is the
Right.
$750,000 that request, that wouldn't take place until FY28. All of the others would take place between now and FY25.
Okay.
And
Well, if
just,
we,
Okay, so between now and 2025 is a period of 4 years. Is which ones come first and which ones come later? In other words, how many come next year in FY 22
No,
and
Pete
FY
is
23 and so forth?
typing something. Oh, crap.
I'm sorry, I don't think I caught all of that, Mr. North.
In other words, having said that, as you point out, which ones would be FY 22, FY 23, 24, and 25?
That is what will come to you at the next board meeting, is that full financial table to know which projects would get money in what year. I can tell you right now that with the return of money from one of the Greenway projects and then the return of the $750,000 from another of the Greenway projects, we have almost $3.4 million available in previous funding. So between now and FY25, we have probably a little over $5 million available. So this is more just a guidance of which ones of these do you want to pursue? And
I think we need to know, reference what Mr. North was saying, you know, which ones, in the order of when they're going to need to be starting construction. You know, we need to know when that's going to happen. That way we can, you know, we wouldn't want to knock on something starting here shortly and then go ahead and approve something that's 4 years down the road. I think we need to know which one is going first, second, third, fourth, so on.
I think that the desired project schedule is one thing, Mr. Chairman, but the feasibility of accomplishing that with STBG funds is another thing, because as I mentioned, there's $3.4 million available in previous funds. And there's actually a deficit in FY22 and 23 funds, which could be accommodated with FY24 and a little bit of FY25 funds. So I would say in total, there's probably $4.4 million available between now and FY25, which isn't enough to cover the first 2 of these requests, and all except one of them. So 6 of these requests are wanting money between now and FY25, and the funds that are available are insufficient to cover even those first 2.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Anita Macmillan from the Town of Vinton. As far as the Walnut Avenue project, it is under 50% design plan at the moment, and we are hoping for it to go under construction advertisement by next fall or earlier.
So with that, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I understood the lady from Benton, that project number 6 on the Walnut Avenue bicycle and pedestrian accommodations is ready this fall. And, you know, I would certainly support that occurring if it's ready for construction.
It's under 50% design, and we're hoping that we can advertise for advertisement by next fall or earlier than next fall. And as far as the Gasney crosswalk, we are redeveloping Gishmill, and we are hoping that project be also considered as a very high priority. Thank you.
And is that question for the lady, Mr. Chair, is she referring to project number 10, the Gus Nix Boulevard Gishmill?
Correct.
Yeah, I think Ms. McMillan was talking about that one, but aren't you also talking about another one up here?
And the Walnut Avenue, correct.
Okay, Walnut Avenue, yeah. So,
Okay.
Mr. North, it was two of them she was talking about, but the
Yes.
one with Gus Nick's Boulevard pedestrian bicycle is number 10, I believe,
Right.
was what she was just saying.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I just think it would have been helpful, and if it could, that in the future, we know what these dates are going to be for estimated construction, ready to go projects with the column shown. In fact, I guess today all we're doing is saying these projects should be put out for public comment. That's what we're being asked to do by the commission staff or the TPO, at which point we won't vote on this until after the public hearing. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
I think that's correct, but I think she wanted us to prioritize these in the order that we wanted to send them out. Is that
Mr.
right,
Chair,
Ms. Coates?
is the order that we are looking at the order that the TDCC recommended?
The order here is the order of priority from the project. So with each round of funding, projects are prioritized, and then the next round adds to the priorities that were identified previously. So those numbers that are listed there do indicate a priority from the oldest prioritized projects to the most recent.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Chair, this is Michael Gray.
Yes, sir, Mr. Gray.
You know, I think what Christina just mentioned there, you know, these projects have been scored, and, you know, what's shown right now is a priority order based off of the round they were done in and the scoring of that round. So that might be good enough to use to do the public involvement piece of it. And then if you want to give direction back to staff to work with the TTC to come up with a kind of a final recommendation that gives y'all a little bit more to view at your next meeting after the public meeting, that might be helpful for y'all to have that input from the TTC, given that I think there's two of them that were mentioned in here that were not discussed or were not, well, the TTC was not aware of when they met prior to this meeting.
I think that would probably be a good idea. I don't know about the other commission members, but it's a little bit confusing trying to determine, you know, what we want to go in what order. I think what you said was probably be a, you know, a good way to go.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Mike Stovall, Town Event.
Yes, sir, Mike.
Sorry, I came in late. Unfortunately, I still got to work for a living, and sometimes you just get twisted up. I guess the first question I got is that if we don't have but a certain pot of dollars right now, and with those pot of dollars, that's the pot of dollars that we know we can spend, would we not want to go ahead and identify the projects that we can get done? Now, naturally, I'm not going, you know, I'm going to be frank with you. I mean, I'm a little biased to number 6 and number 10, but if we don't have a certain pot of dollars, not to be repetitious, do we not want to go ahead and fund the projects that we have the money for, show the public that that's what we're going to spend the money on, and then when the other money comes available, go back for the other funding?
Well, I think that's basically what we were trying to do. I think you have a very good point there.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I guess the hope was that we would be able to put out for public comment precisely what it was that was being considered for additional funding. So to put out for public comment a larger amount of potential items. It's kind of like when the localities go through their budgeting process, you don't put out for public comment that there might be a whole lot of extra things. If there was more money available, you put out what you're planning to do with the money that you have available. And so we do have a $3 million shortfall from the requests compared to the money that is available. And so a prioritization on, and I think there's a number of considerations here. You know, the responsibilities that each of the localities might have, and the ability for the other funding sources to be sought and used for some of these cost overruns, as well as the schedule. And given that some of these requests are for construction and some of these requests are to consider future leverage money, there's two different things that are being asked for here. So that might come into the prioritization as well.
Okay. Now
Let me
you're-
ask, I'm sorry.
Okay, we have $6,967,221 that's being requested. Additional funds. Now, is that what we have right here that we can select from to prioritize, or is that just the additional funds that we need? We wanted $13.5 million to take care of all these projects. Is that correct?
So this is just for the 7 projects. It does not include Botetourt's Route 220 Super Street.
Right, I understand
Right.
that, but we're about $6 million short.
Right.
Is that correct?
How
Right.
much? I'm sorry. How much short are we again? I'm sorry.
About $6 million short on what we need.
Okay, got it.
$3 million, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, 3 million?
Yes.
Okay, so should we go over here to the original amount and look at that and see what funds we have now and prioritize it from that? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask,
This is Michael Gregan.
We had, Mike, we had someone spoke up right for you. Wait just a second.
Sure.
Who is that other?
it's Lee Osborne. I'm glad to defer to Mike, but I'm trying to understand, question was asked earlier if the TTC was recommending this. And then what we're hearing is that we can't approve what is being recommended. So I'm trying to understand, as the TTC looked at the question that you're asking us to consider and made recommendations regarding the priority of these projects, which hopefully would have taken into account many of the questions that are being asked concerning timing, need for funds, and whether or not they are conditional or whether or not they are for actual expenditures. Has the TTC considered what we're being asked to decide on right now?
Yes, Mr. North. The TTC has considered all of these items and suggested that they be approved, with the exception of the Tinker Creek Trail Extension Project, which the request came in after the TTC meeting. So that's a $1.5 million request. And it does not include Benton's additional funding request. So it was an updated amount. The TTC had viewed, so this is number 6, they had viewed the $260,000 and Benton that's actually needing $336,000. So with the exception of those 2 things, all of the other items have been reviewed and recommended for approval by the board. Now that being said, the money worked out well at that point. And the little bit that was over at that point, which was, I was estimating at $24,000, was going to come out of the Route 220 Botetourt Super Street leverage funding. So there wasn't really an impact to any of the projects, though it may have impacted their schedules a little bit. So the new wrinkle, I mean, because, time continues. And so in the time that has passed since the TTC meeting, these additional funding requests have come in. And so we were hoping to get some direction from the board so that we could get some draft information programmed in the CTB's 6-year improvement program. And then the TTC would look at the details of all of the funding at their next meeting and look at that table, allocations by fiscal year. So they would make a recommendation on that table and those details at their next meeting, and you would see that at the April meeting.
So we could vote to put out for public hearing the what was actually recommended and approved or seen and recommended by the TTC, which would exclude what I'm hearing, item 5 and 40,000 roughly of one of the Vinton projects. And that would bring us in nearly at budget.
Yes. So yes, if you would like to not consider the 2 most recent requests, that would be at the board's discretion. And just to clarify, The change for item number 6 would be closer to $76,000.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
thank you for those comments, Ms. Finch. In looking at this, thought comes to mind that on two things. Number one, Roanoke County can delay the increased orange market amount of almost $900,000 because we won't be construction ready until FY 23 or 24 at the earliest. So that should help some. And secondly, because these other projects came in a bit late, it sounds like to me that this ought to go back to the TTC for a special called meeting and reprioritize these based on their recommendation before it goes out to public hearing. And if that's a problem, then, you know, someone speak up and say so. But I think that we need to, these stragglers that came in late for whatever reason, they should be at least vetted out by the TDCC for recommendation back to us. And, you know, we had to have a special meeting last year, the TPO, to do something. And perhaps there can be one put together virtually on Zoom for the TDCC to review these and then send it back over to us before we throw them to the public for review. That's just my recommendation for discussion.
That's a good point, Mr. North. And Mr. Gray, you wanted to say something also?
Yes, sir. The things I was looking at was, you know, you have a list of projects that include some that weren't necessarily seen by the TTC, those two other ones that came in late. So my initial thought was, you know, you can either, if you're going to go to the public after this meeting, you can go through with the entire list, or you could do what I think Mr. Osborne and someone else was saying. You could go back to the TTC and have them kind of come up with a more detailed recommended list, taking into consideration those two new projects. So you could go two routes. You could go the one where it goes back to the TTC, then back to the policy board, or go to the public and let them see everything, and then it'll be prioritized by the TTC to come back to the policy board.
That's a good point. My own personal opinion, I'd like to see it go back to the TTC for a little bit more clarification on this. It'd make it a whole lot easier for us to be able to make the decisions. That's just my opinion. Any comments?
Mr. Chairman, can we put that in the form of a motion, or do we need more discussion on that?
Well, does anyone have any other comments to make? If not, I'd be glad to put that in a motion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Benjamin Tripp.
Yes, sir, Mr. Tripp.
We would be happy to do that for you guys.
Bless your heart. Thank you.
Mr. Tripp is, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tripp is what, the chairman of the TDCC?
Yes, he is.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp.
You're welcome.
I'll make the motion to refer this back to the TTC for more clarification. And thank you, Mr. Tripp, for that. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second.
Mr. Chairman, before we vote, can I make one point under the discussion part?
Yes, sir.
Can we ask the TPC to also, once they go back and revisit all of them and add the two to it, can we ask them to put in the note section or footnote section where each project is as far as
Timeline.
started, timeline, under design, 2028, you know, whatever the situation is.
Yes. And we can just add that into my motion. And who seconded that, or did someone second that?
There was a number of people that did.
There's a number of people that seconded.
Yeah. I think Mr. Jeffrey seconded it first.
Okay, is it okay with you, Mr. Jeffries, if we amend that motion to add that other information in?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is there any question or discussion on this motion? If not, Mr. Strickland, we'll take a roll call vote.
Yes, sir. Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Jeffrey,
Yes.
Ms. Moon Reynolds,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Mayor Turk,
Yes.
Mr. Lyles,
Yes.
Mr. Stovall,
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Sonneckler.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Finch, do you have anything else to add on that presentation?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's see, agenda item number 5 is adoption of the 2021 MAP 21 asset condition performance measure target, percentage of deck area of bridges in good condition. You'll find that on pages 11 and 12. And Mr. Brian Hill, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Good afternoon. As we've brought to you this year a couple different times, we're in the midst of updating and adjusting various of the MAP 21 performance measures and targets. And this one that we have before you today is one of, and if for those following along on page 11, have a table of 6 asset condition performance measures that this body adopted in October of 2018. And the one that we're going to be looking at today in particular is the percentage of deck area bridges in good condition, and that's in the National Bridge Inventory on the National Highway System. Back in 2018, this along with 5 other targets discussing pavements and good and poor condition on the interstate, the non-interstate National Highway System, and then the deck area bridges in good and poor condition. This was adopted, but we did receive a word from the state and Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment that the CTB had in a mid-performance period progress report to FHWA had chosen to change the 4-year 2021 target for this particular measure from 33.0% to now what they have changed to 30.5%. And as I've discussed with you all before, our philosophy and practice has been when given the option of either adopting the VDOT and state targets versus going out on our own, developing our own methodology and coming up with our own target, we have chosen to adopt the VDOT targets. This obviously is continues to be the philosophy. So let me talk just a tiny bit about the rationale why the CTB did change this from 33 to 30.5. 3 reasons really: aligning the target with the current performance, accounting for corrected baseline condition data, and then just taking into account the influence of previous investment strategies that reduce the number of bridges in poor condition. Let's see, and I've mentioned that the established target is 33.0%, and the adjusted target that the CTB adopted is 30.5%. On March 11th, the TTC recommended adoption of this adjustment, and obviously staff does recommend the adjustment as well, and we have a supporting resolution to that effect on the next page. So we're seeking action on adoption of the adjustment.
All right. Any questions, comments from Mr. Hill? Okay, we do have a resolution that needs to be approved. Is this correct?
Yes, sir.
That's on page, I believe it's on page 12. So
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Hill? Any comments? Any discussion? Okay, if not, then I'll entertain a motion to either accept or reject the resolution on page 12.
Ms. Moon Reynolds, accept the resolution as requested.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Reynolds,
Second by Rad.
second by Mr. Radford. Okay. Well, before we take a roll call vote, is there any questions or discussion on this? Okay, if not, Mr. Strickland, we'll take a roll call vote then. Mr. Strickland, are you there?
I am there,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. I was lost in the muted area. All right, Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Clinton,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Jeffrey,
Yes.
Ms. Moon Reynolds,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Mayor Turk,
Yes.
Mr. Lyles,
Yes.
Mr. Stovall. Mr. Stovall. Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mr. Sonnenklar.
Yes.
The motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Motion is carried. Mr. Hill, do you have any other comments on item number 5?
No, sir, I don't. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
thank you, sir. Then we'll go to agenda item number 6, other business. We have a briefing of the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan. That's on pages 13 through page 44. Ms. Finch, I believe this is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Martin.
Yes, ma'am.
This is just a brief update. We had presented to the board back in December about the Roanoke Valley's transportation plan, which is undergoing an update. The plan does get updated every 5 years, and it really is the roadmap for the region, all of the stakeholders to really look at what are the region's goals, what are the priorities, and what are ultimately the investments that are going to be pursued in order to accomplish what the region is hoping to accomplish. And as part of this effort, we have undertaken a needs assessment, which is what's the main bulk of what's included in the agenda packet. It's the first ever needs assessment that we have done for the region in looking at what are the transportation needs. And I'll explain that the transportation need, as we went in depth at the last presentation back in December, the transportation need is the problem that people or businesses experience getting to where they are going or moving what they are selling and receiving. So we've done a lot with looking at surveys, getting public input, looking at past plans to gather from all of these sources what we can identify as those issues that people or businesses are experiencing when they're trying to move around the region, when they're trying to get to their destinations, or why they can't get to their destinations. So there is a lot of information and it's very robust. We've categorized the needs into different categories. So looking at congestion, safety, access, and system management, which is more the maintenance and operations areas. There are a lot of needs in our region, a lot of issues that people are experiencing as they try to move around the region. And so as the board thinks about the funding, which I just spoke about, STBG is only one pot of funding, but all of the other funding sources that are available to make improvements in our region, we can see that it's a very limited pot of money and a lot of needs. So wanted to just highlight that the compilation of the needs that we have identified and are included in a map that is linked in the agenda packet. And I hope you'll take some time to look through that map and just see all the problem spots that are identified in the region. They in no way indicate how those issues might be addressed. That will come in a future phase of this work. And it doesn't indicate at all which of those problem spots is more important than another. That too will be coming in a future phase of this work.
It's 2 o'clock.
We are fortunate to have helping us with this long-range plan, Cambridge Systematics, and you were introduced to them back in December. And they are working with the TTC to look at what are future considerations. And that's the next step that we have with the TTC, is to look at what are those things coming online in the future: autonomous vehicles, technology, will people continue to be teleworking, all kinds of things that might affect how we plan and then invest our dollars looking to the future. And so while this plan has the time horizon, the thought process of what's going to be happening between now and the year 2045, it really only guides our actions for the next 5 years until we update that plan again. So if you have any questions about the needs assessment, I'd be happy to answer those questions, but we're not asking for any action from the board at this time.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Finch? Comments?
Mr. Chair, just one comment in noting the information. It's certainly a lot of safety dots on that map, and rightfully so on 460 out there in the Roanoke County, Bedford County, Roanoke County, Roanoke City line, as well as the usual suspects on 81. And this just confirms that in that survey from our citizens. So good data, and nice work, Ms. Finch.
Thank you.
Yes, it is. Okay, any other comments? All right, if not, we'll go to item number B, briefing on the regional study of transportation project. I believe Eddie Wills is going to do the presentation on this one.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. A very brief update. Share the screen with a short presentation here. As you all know, we've been working the past 4 or 5 months on updating the regional study on transportation project prioritization for economic development and growth, formerly called the TED study. TPO asked us to go through, update the study, and in particular look at existing needs and future projects. So far, we've been following some of the same sort of steps that were taken in the original 2018 study, looking at refining needs, eventually identifying transportation priorities, and then I guess hopefully by the end of this process, having the TPO select some projects that for the priorities across the region. Framework for prioritization, we're going through this step by step. So we've been looking at transportation needs. The TTC received an update last month where they will start addressing some solutions and priorities. Those are the next 2 steps. The project step in this circle here will come back to the TPO. Timeline that we're looking at, you've seen most of this as of last month's TPO meeting. Since then, we've given the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Committee a briefing to sort of let them know where we're at in the process. At the March 11th TTC meeting, we shared the same needs list that is in your agenda package today, I guess pages 44 through 47, with the TTC and asked them to begin thinking about solutions to some of these needs. And keep in mind that the needs that we're seeing are coming from economic development stakeholders. That includes local economic development staff, representatives from the Chamber of Commerce, Visit Virginia's Blue Ridge, regional partnership organizations like that. The first, I guess there's 18 items that are listed as showing up to be a priority. These are all projects that were selected by multiple participants during the planning process so far. These are grouped and numbered just for organizational sake. They have not been ranked or scored or anything like that. Just take some time look over the needs that we've identified. We've tried to group them. Here you see the first group is 1 through 3 is really directed toward air travel, realizing TPO doesn't have a lot of control over what goes on at the airport, but also realizing that the airport is key to economic development in the region and is important. Number 4, businesses having a hard time getting employees. That is really addressing getting labor force to the job site, whether that's somebody going across town to get to a job, or somebody driving in from Martinsville or Covington or Blacksburg, and how do we get them here, and how wide of a net do our local businesses have to cast to really get the employees that they need for the jobs they have available. Congestion on 460, we've talked a little bit about that already today. Also safety issues, some of that is being addressed. 7 through 10, traveling south from Roanoke into Franklin County, or even farther in North Carolina, the ports in South Carolina, even Florida. Travel times are too long, it was felt. There's still safety concerns on US 220, still congestion concerns on US 220 South. There's really only one road coming in from Franklin County to Roanoke County, depending on what traffic is like. If you get stopped, you may not have another way to get in. So that 220 South is a concern. 11 through 13 address sort of the Peters Creek 581 interchange, Valley Point Parkway, and the Woodhaven Industrial Park. Those could probably be considered one large project, although the cost of doing these is going to require the construction be phased. Each one of those likely needs a separate solution, but those, I think it was good that people were recognizing that the Woodhaven site is important and is a regional need. Congestion on at the exit 150 park and ride lot. The lot is currently used by commuters and an increasing number of Appalachian Trail users. That park and ride lot's not really designed to hold or accommodate users on that scale and that number of vehicles. We'll be looking congestion on Route 419. Of course, the entire corridor, Tanglewood to Oak Grove to Lewiscale and Apperson. There's access to parcels and businesses along that corridor. How do you time the signals, addressing safety issues? All of those are identified as needs along 419. I-581 Orange Avenue interchange. Certain times of day, merging on and off the interstate is difficult. Number 17, long-term parking at Amtrak. Not attractive, not well signed, and unreliable. I think something along the lines of the unreliable part being that there's not always parking as close to the platform as people would like. Sometimes the on-street parking is full, the garage is full. And the last one out of these is major entrances to a lot of the localities could use better, I guess, wayfinding signage. We've got that the entrances could be more attractive. Several of the localities have done monument type signage. We were looking at with this item more wayfinding similar to what Visit Virginia's Blue Ridge is doing, trying to get a sort of a regional brand and get people from the interstate or from the major highways to the downtowns and the tourist destinations, or something similar to what the city of Roanoke has done in the past with wayfinding, getting people to Center in the Square and the Transportation Museum, or getting people from downtown up to the Parkway or out to Explore Park, and what's the best way to do that. And these are the ones, again, that were selected by multiple participants in the program. There's another 4-page list of items or of needs that were identified that's included in your agenda package today. Those, may end up being on the priority list. That's really going to be determined through the TTC's work and TPO's work. Our next steps, March and April, TTC has already started to look at possible solutions to address a lot of these needs. We'll be meeting with them again at their April meeting to get their input on that. In May, we hope to come back to the TPO with an update and a presentation of a draft report detailing what those priority needs and some possible solutions are. In June, we'd like to finalize a document with projects in it and incorporate that into the RVTPO long-range transportation plan process. I guess if anybody has any questions on the process or any of the needs that we've identified or anything, I'm open for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, there were some good points made on it, especially that number 16, Interstate 581 Orange Avenue interchange. That is just an accident waiting to happen every day.
Yeah.
And some of the others that the earlier ones you put on there, I think are excellent points. And I think a lot of these need to be corrected or improved on. That's just my own opinion. Any comments from the TPO board members?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr. North.
this is a great list. I'm glad to see this. It sounds as if the list is coming along nicely and look forward to the final product. Just a couple of comments. Some of the mentions on east of 460 and items number 5 and 6 on page 44. We know smart scale funding both for city and county projects come through. I think 4 or 5 of those, which will help address that congestion and improve that safety. As noted earlier, that is a very concerning safety route on 460 East. Secondly, there's mention about 220 south to North Carolina, Florida. Something to think about, and it was number 4 that was submitted by our Roanoke County member, Paul Mahoney, to the SEDS committee for consideration. If President Biden's infrastructure legislation comes through with $3 trillion, of which $1 trillion, I believe, is for road and bridge infrastructure. That's going to be huge. It could reinvigorate the I-73 discussion that has been around for years. And just a couple other things to do a commercial here, if you will, on Explorer Park. I think we're working with Bedford and Roanoke County and Benton to get another entrance on to the Blue Ridge Parkway to help improve the economic impact. And something else that was submitted, I don't see on here, it's not a transportation project, but it is a career and technical education regional concept that you might be hearing more about in the future. Let's face it, you can do more collectively in the region at a less cost impact to each local government in the region if you work together. And so one day we may be seeing some dialogue about that subject. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Any other comments from members of the TPO?
I know that this is Renee Turk. I know that the Airport Commission has been identifying those 3 top on the priority list. And I know that the desire is to move forward on those. The third one, not so much, but 1 and 2. I know that there's a desire to extend runway 624 over across the interstate. Where the funding will come from remains to be seen. But we know that we cannot grow in this area if we cannot land larger aircraft, whether they be cargo transportation or people transportation. So I know that's high on their priority list and what they're looking at.
You're correct on that. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wells. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
item 6C, draft review of FY22 Unified Planning Work Program. I believe Ms. Finch is up on that one again.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to share with you today the draft Unified Planning Work Program for next fiscal year. This is the list of all the activities to take place within the TPO for planning activities. And of course, a number of the resources must go towards what's federally required. Since the bulk of the money is provided by the federal government, there are a number of strings attached on how the money can be used and the activities that they would like to see conducted for regional transportation planning. So items like doing long-range planning, thinking about the future. How do we prepare today for what might be coming up in the future? As I had spoken about just a bit ago, are one of the big things that we're continuing to work on and identified in this draft UPWP. Things like what Mr. Hill spoke about with performance measures, and how do we measure the performance of our system, and how do we meet federal requirements for measuring performance on our system. So things like that are included in this UPWP. The work that we're doing with consultants to look at the region and plan for the region is also included, as is all of the work that we do with the localities to prepare grant applications. So whether that be smart scale or other items, managing the STBG program, the TA program for the TPO, that's all included here, as well as putting together the transportation improvement program. So lots and lots of items that are just ongoing, recurring items that are included in the work program. There are a few new items. So to the extent that we can, we try to accommodate local project requests, and through the regional commission's work program process, there is a notice sent out to all of the TPO members, all of the localities within the RVARC region to ask for ideas on projects. And some of them have been incorporated into this Unified Planning Work Program. In particular, we have been asked to be part of a study for Explore Park and how might another point of access be provided to Explore Park. Another project is looking at the Route 24 corridor within the Benton area, being part of a study in that area, as well as looking at Vineyard Road in Benton. There's a lot of activity taking place with the expansion of Rosie's and a number of concerns in that area. So related to traffic and people movement. So we'll be studying some of that. And then we're also incorporating some of our regional planning efforts. So there was a safety study that was done a few years ago, and we've been working to implement some of the ideas that came out of that, the recommendations, working with localities on addressing the problem spots identified for safety. And so the city of Roanoke has asked for a Vision Zero effort, which goes beyond the performance measures that we have, which acknowledges that there will be not perfection in terms of safety, either injuries or fatalities, but the Vision Zero interest from the city of Roanoke would look at how do you address safety and go beyond that so that we don't see any injuries or fatalities on the roads. So some initial research and getting stakeholders together to look at that are a few of the items. We'll be continuing with the Greenway count program that we have, continuing with the bicycle plan update and a number of other items. So they're all detailed out. I don't need to go into each one of them, but there are a lot of items listed in this work program. And we will be finalizing our budget information and then providing you a final copy next month for adoption.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from anyone on the board? No questions or comments. Okay, thank you, Ms. Finch.
You're welcome.
Board, you always do a good job on that. Agenda item number 7 is comment period. The TPO policy board members and or the public. Is there anyone that would like to make any comments before we adjourn?
And this smartphone, like everybody said, is always outsmart me. And it for some reason on that.
Mr. Clinton, was that you? Did you? All right, any comments from anyone on the board? Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for being in attendance today. With that said, I'll just go ahead and adjourn the meeting, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.